The water hit him square in the face. It was ice water from a crystal glass, the kind of glass that costs $40 at a home goods store, and that wealthy people use for everyday drinking because they can afford to replace the things they break. The water was cold, and the glass was heavy, and the woman who threw it had the arm of someone who had played tennis 3 times a week for 20 years. The man didn't flinch. That was the thing that everyone who witnessed it would remember later. The water hit his face, ran down his beard, soaked into the collar of his worn flannel shirt, and he didn't flinch. He didn't step back. He didn't raise his hands. He just stood there, on the sidewalk outside La Maison Dorée, the most exclusive restaurant in downtown Philadelphia, and he let the water run down his face with the patience of a man who has been rained on before. His name was Arthur James Beaumont. He was 63 years old. He was wearing clothes that hadn't been washed in several days. His beard was untrimmed. His hair was long and gray and pulled back with a rubber band. His shoes were work boots, scuffed and cracked, the kind of boots that tell a story about labor and time and the particular wear that comes from a life spent standing up. He looked homeless. That was the point. He looked like exactly the kind of person who had no business standing within 50 feet of La Maison Dorée, a restaurant where the average entree cost $65, and the wine list included bottles that cost more than most people's monthly rent. He looked like an obstacle, an eyesore, a stain on the polished granite steps and the brass-framed doors and the carefully curated atmosphere of exclusivity that the restaurant had spent 20 years cultivating. The woman who threw the water was named Diane Ashbury. She was 44 years old. She was the wife of a hedge fund manager. She was wearing a cream-colored Chanel suit and Louboutin heels and a diamond tennis bracelet that caught the evening light and scattered it across the sidewalk like confetti. She had been walking toward the restaurant entrance with 3 friends, all similarly dressed, all similarly positioned in the social hierarchy of Philadelphia's main line, all anticipating the 7-course tasting menu and the French wines and the ambient jazz and the particular pleasure of spending $400 on dinner in a room full of people who could afford the same. Arthur had been sitting on the sidewalk next to the entrance, not blocking it, not begging, just sitting, with his back against the wall and his legs stretched out and a cardboard cup beside him with a few coins in it. He hadn't spoken to anyone. He hadn't approached anyone. He had simply existed in a space where people like him were not supposed to exist, and his existence had been enough to offend. Diane had seen him from 20 feet away. She had slowed her pace. Her face had arranged itself into the expression she wore when encountering things that didn't belong in her world. Pigeons on her terrace, a scratch on her car, a homeless man outside a restaurant where she had a reservation. She had tried to walk past him. She had lifted her chin and accelerated her stride and aimed herself at the brass-framed door with the determination of a woman who has spent a lifetime not seeing things she doesn't want to see. But Arthur had made a mistake. He had looked at her, not aggressively, not confrontationally. He had simply looked up from the sidewalk and made eye contact, the way humans do when another human passes within 3 feet of them. It was automatic, involuntary, the basic social reflex of a species that communicates through gaze. But for Diane, it was an intrusion, a violation. The homeless were not supposed to look at her. They were supposed to be invisible. They were supposed to understand their position in the hierarchy and maintain it by keeping their eyes on the ground. He had looked at her, and worse, he had spoken. "Good evening," he said, 2 words, spoken softly, politely, with the unhurried cadence of someone who is in no rush because he has nowhere to be. 2 words that, from any other mouth, in any other context, would have been unremarkable. A greeting, a courtesy, the most basic unit of human interaction. But from a homeless man to a woman in Chanel on the steps of La Maison Dorée, those 2 words were an act of transgression. They asserted equality. They assumed the right to participate in a social exchange that Diane had not authorized. They said, "I see you, and I am a person, and persons greet each other." Diane stopped walking. She turned, and she picked up her water glass, which she had been carrying from the car because she always carried a glass of lemon water with her, because hydration was important and public drinking fountains were disgusting, and she threw it in his face. "Don't talk to me," she said. Her voice was loud enough for her friends to hear, loud enough for the doorman to hear, loud enough for the couple walking past on the sidewalk to hear, and to pretend they hadn't heard, because witnessing cruelty requires a response, and most people are not prepared to respond. You people need to stay away from places like this. Nobody wants to see you. Nobody wants to smell you. You're ruining the atmosphere for paying customers. She turned to the doorman, a young man named Marcus who was 24 years old and who was working this job to pay for his last year of college, and who was standing behind the brass frame door with the expression of someone who is watching something terrible and doesn't know what to do. "Call the police," Diane said. "Tell them there's a vagrant harassing customers." Marcus looked at Arthur. Arthur was still sitting on the sidewalk, water dripping from his beard, coins glinting in the cardboard cup. He had not moved. He had not responded. He had not done anything except exist and greet and be punished for both. "Ma'am," he wasn't. "I said call the police. Or do I need to speak with the manager about the quality of service at this establishment?" Marcus looked at the ground. He reached for his phone. He was 24 years old, and he needed this job. And the woman in front of him was the kind of woman who could make one phone call and end his employment and his financial aid and his plans for the future. The math was simple and terrible, and he did the math, and he pulled out his phone. Arthur stood up, slowly, carefully, with the deliberate movements of a man who wants every witness to see that he is not aggressive, not threatening, not anything except a human being rising from a seated position on a public sidewalk. He wiped the water from his face with the back of his hand. He looked at Diane. He looked at her for a long time. 3 seconds, 4, 5. Long enough for her to notice, long enough for her friends to notice, long enough for Marcus, phone in hand, to pause. Then Arthur spoke again, not loudly, not angrily, in the same soft, unhurried voice that had said, "Good evening. There's no need to call the police, Marcus. I'll take care of this." Marcus froze. He looked at Arthur. His eyes widened slightly, not with fear, with recognition, with the specific, dawning, oh no recognition of someone who has just realized that the situation is not what it appears to be, and that the ground beneath everyone's feet is about to shift. "You know his name," one of Diane's friends said. She was looking at Arthur with the first stirring of curiosity, the kind that replaces contempt when the narrative stops making sense. Arthur reached into the pocket of his flannel shirt. He pulled out a keyring. On the keyring were 7 keys, a fob for a late model BMW, and a small brass tag engraved with 2 words, Arthur Beaumont. He held the keys up so Diane could see the tag. Then he turned to Marcus. "Open the door, please." Marcus opened the door. Arthur walked into La Maison Dorée. He walked through the foyer with the Italian marble floors and the crystal chandelier and the fresh flower arrangements that were changed every 3 days at a cost of $800 per arrangement. He walked past the hostess stand, where a young woman named Elena looked up from the reservation book and said, "Good evening, Mr. Beaumont," with the calm, professional courtesy of someone who says these words to this man every day and who is not surprised to see him in a flannel shirt and work boots, because she has learned that appearances are unreliable and that the most important people in the world often look like the least important. He walked through the main dining room, 60 seats, white tablecloths, candlelight, silver, crystal, the sound of conversation and cutlery, and the ambient jazz that played softly from speakers hidden in the ceiling. He walked past tables where Philadelphia's elite sat eating courses that had been designed by a chef who had trained in Lion and who considered every plate a canvas and every meal a performance. Every table he passed went quiet, not because he was making noise, because he was making silence. The kind of silence that spreads through a room when something unprecedented is happening. The kind that says, "Pay attention, something is about to change." He walked to the back of the restaurant, through a door marked private, down a hallway lined with photographs, black and white, color, decades of images showing a young man in a chef's coat, standing in a kitchen, standing in a dining room, standing in front of a building with a sign that said La Maison Dorée, and a smile that said everything else. The young man in the photographs was Arthur, 20 years younger, 30 years younger, clean-shaven, bright-eyed, wearing the kind of expression that people wear when they are building something they believe in. He entered his office. It was a small room, a desk, a computer, a filing cabinet, a window that looked out onto the alley behind the restaurant, which was not scenic, but which Arthur had always preferred to the dining room view because the alley was honest. The alley didn't pretend to be anything. It was dumpsters and delivery trucks, and the back door where the kitchen staff smoked on their breaks and told jokes in Spanish and English and Vietnamese and the dozen other languages that constituted the real lingua franca of the American restaurant industry. Arthur sat down at his desk. He opened the top drawer. He took out a clean shirt, a sport coat, and a pair of shoes that he kept there for occasions exactly like this one. He changed. He combed his hair. He trimmed his beard with a small pair of scissors he kept in the desk. He looked at himself in the small mirror on the back of the office door and saw what he always saw when he transitioned from one version of himself to another. The same man, just different packaging. Arthur Beaumont had built La Maison Dorée from nothing, from less than nothing, from a childhood in the Kensington neighborhood of Philadelphia, which was then and is now one of the poorest, most drug-ravaged neighborhoods in America. From a mother who cleaned offices at night and died at 47 from a heart condition she couldn't afford to treat. From a father he never met. From a foster care system that processed him like a package, moving him from house to house, family to family, each one a different shade of temporary. His mother's name was Loretta. She was the kind of woman who worked so hard that work became her identity, her purpose, and eventually her coffin. She cleaned offices in Center City from 11 at night to 7 in the morning, 5 nights a week, for 16 years. She came home smelling like bleach and floor polish, and she made Arthur breakfast before he went to school, and she sat with him at the kitchen table while he ate and asked him about his homework and his teachers and his friends. And by the time he answered the last question, she was usually asleep, her chin resting on her hand, her eyes closed, her body finally surrendering to the exhaustion she had been fighting since midnight. She died on a Tuesday. Arthur was 16. He came home from school and found her on the kitchen floor, her hand still holding the mop she had been using to clean their own apartment, because even on her day off, Loretta cleaned. Because cleaning was the only language she knew for saying, "I love you," and "I'm sorry," and "this is the best I can do." The foster care system took Arthur the next day. The first family was kind, but overwhelmed. The second was indifferent. The third was cruel in the small, daily grinding way that cruelty operates in underfunded homes with too many children and not enough patience. Arthur left the third home at 17, not because he was thrown out, but because he walked out. He packed a backpack with 2 shirts, a pair of jeans, and his mother's Bible, and he walked out the front door and into the streets of Philadelphia and became, in the space of a single step, a statistic. He had been homeless, not metaphorically, not as an exercise in empathy or a spiritual retreat or a social experiment. He had been homeless the real way. The sleeping under bridges way, the eating from dumpsters way, the being invisible to every person who walks past you way. He had been homeless from the age of 17 to the age of 21. 4 years of his life spent on the streets of Philadelphia, learning things about human nature that no university teaches and no textbook contains. The first winter nearly killed him. He slept in a doorway on Market Street and woke up with his fingers so numb that he couldn't feel them for 3 hours. A man from a shelter found him and brought him inside and gave him coffee and a blanket and told him about the resources available to homeless youth, the shelters and the programs and the outreach services that existed in the space between the city's conscience and the city's budget. Arthur used the resources. He stayed in shelters when there was room. He ate at soup kitchens. He went to the day centers where you could shower and wash your clothes and sit in a warm room and feel, for a few hours, like you belonged to the human race. But the resources were not enough. They were never enough. There were too many people and not enough beds, and the waiting lists were longer than the winters, and the bureaucracy moved at the speed of a glacier while the suffering moved at the speed of a heartbeat. He learned things during those 4 years that shaped him more than any education ever could. He learned that most people, when they see a homeless person, feel one of 3 things: pity, which is condescending; fear, which is ignorant; or nothing, which is the worst of all, because nothing means you have successfully dehumanized another person to the point where they no longer register as human. He learned that the kindest people are often the poorest, that the woman who runs the bodega and gives you a free coffee when it's cold has more generosity in her pinky finger than the man who donates $1 million to a charity and takes a tax deduction. That kindness, real kindness, is not a transaction. It's a reflex. It happens automatically, without calculation, without expectation, because the person doing it cannot imagine not doing it. He learned that dignity is not something you earn. It is something you have inherently, simply by being alive, and the world's failure to recognize it does not diminish it. He learned this from the men and women he met on the streets, people who had lost everything except the fundamental, unshakable knowledge that they were worth something. People who shared their last piece of bread. People who covered a stranger with their own coat on a freezing night. People who, despite everything, said please and thank you and good morning, and treated each other with the respect that the housed world refused to give them. And he learned to cook, not in a culinary school, in a soup kitchen on Spring Garden Street, where a man named Chef Reginald, who had cooked in the Navy for 20 years and who ran the kitchen with military precision and paternal warmth, taught Arthur how to make a meal from almost nothing, how to turn a bag of potatoes and a few carrots and a chicken carcass into a soup that fed 50 people and made every one of them feel, for 20 minutes, like the world cared about them. Chef Reginald saw something in Arthur, the same thing that good teachers and good cooks and good human beings always see in the people standing in front of them. Potential, not the abstract, theoretical potential that guidance counselors talk about. The real kind, the kind that shows up in the way someone holds a knife, or stirs a pot, or tastes a sauce, and adjusts the seasoning without being told. The instinct, the feel, the thing that cannot be taught but can be recognized and nurtured. Cooking is not about the ingredients, Chef Reginald said. Cooking is about respect. Respect for the food, respect for the people eating it, respect for yourself. When you cook with respect, everything tastes better. Arthur never forgot that. He carried it with him off the streets through a series of restaurant jobs that started with washing dishes at a diner in Fishtown, where the owner paid him under the table and let him sleep in the storage room. He washed dishes for a year. Then he was promoted to prep cook, and he spent another year chopping onions and peeling potatoes and learning the rhythms of a professional kitchen. Then line cook, then sous chef at a restaurant in Rittenhouse Square, where the head chef recognized his talent and pushed him hard, the way mentors push people they believe in, past his comfort zone and his self-doubt and the voice in his head that still said, "Every day, you're a homeless kid from Kensington. You don't belong here." He went to night classes at community college. He enrolled in a culinary program at a technical school that he paid for with tip money and scholarships, and the kind of determination that comes from knowing with absolute certainty that this is your one chance and you cannot afford to waste it. He apprenticed at a restaurant in New York where he learned the French techniques that would become the foundation of his own cuisine. He opened La Maison Dorée in 2004. He was 39 years old. He used every dollar he had saved, every dollar he could borrow, and a small business loan from a bank that almost didn't approve him because his credit history had gaps in it that corresponded to the years he had spent sleeping under bridges. The restaurant was successful from the beginning, not because of the food, though the food was exceptional, because of something less tangible, an atmosphere, a feeling, the sense, hard to articulate but impossible to miss, that the person behind this restaurant understood something about hospitality that went deeper than service and decor. That the person behind this restaurant knew what it meant to be hungry, not the kind of hunger that drives you to a 7-course tasting menu. The other kind, the kind that drives you to a soup kitchen at 6 in the morning because you haven't eaten in 2 days. Arthur built La Maison Dorée into one of the best restaurants in Philadelphia. He earned awards. He earned recognition. He earned the respect of a culinary community that judged him by his food and not by his past. He earned the kind of success that comes not from privilege, but from talent and work and the stubborn refusal to let the world's assessment of his worth define his actual worth. But he never forgot where he came from, and he never stopped going back. Every Tuesday, Arthur put on his old clothes, the flannel shirt, the work boots, the untrimmed beard that he maintained specifically for this purpose. And he went out onto the streets of Philadelphia and sat where he used to sit and watched the world from the vantage point of someone who is invisible. He did this for 2 reasons. The first was personal, a reminder, a recalibration, the way a compass needs to be checked against true north to make sure it hasn't drifted. Arthur's true north was the sidewalk, the cardboard cup, the cold concrete, the world from below. He returned to it because he was afraid of forgetting it, because he had seen what happens to people who forget where they came from. They become the kind of people who throw water in a homeless man's face. The second reason was professional, research, intelligence gathering. He sat on the sidewalk and he watched how people treated the invisible. He watched who stepped over him and who stepped around him and who made eye contact and who looked away. He watched which restaurants let their staff bring food to the homeless and which ones called the police. He watched the entire theater of wealth and poverty play out on the streets of his city, and he used what he observed to run his restaurant, because La Maison Dorée was not just a restaurant. It was a statement, an argument, a living, breathing rebuttal to the idea that fine dining and human decency are incompatible. Arthur hired ex-convicts. He hired recovering addicts. He hired people who had been homeless, people who had been incarcerated, people who had been written off by every institution in the city. He hired them not as charity, but as strategy, because he knew from personal experience that the people who have been at the bottom understand service in a way that people who have always been comfortable never will. They understand what it means to be ignored. They understand what it means to be dismissed, and because they understand it, they are incapable of doing it to someone else. His staff was the most diverse in the city. His kitchen spoke 6 languages. His wait staff included a former Marine who had done 3 tours. In Afghanistan, a single mother who had put herself through community college while working 2 other jobs, and a young man named Marcus who was working his way through his last year at Temple University and who stood at the front door every evening and greeted every guest with the same words, regardless of what they were wearing or what they looked like. Good evening. Welcome to La Maison Dorée. Every guest, every time, without exception, without judgment, because that was the culture Arthur had built. A culture of radical, unconditional welcome, which is why, on this particular evening, when a woman in Chanel threw water in Arthur's face and called him a vagrant and demanded that Marcus call the police, the irony was so extreme that it circled past painful and arrived at something close to cosmic. Now Arthur was sitting in his office, changed into his clean shirt and sport coat, looking at the security camera feed on his computer. The feed showed the dining room. Diane Ashbury and her 3 friends had been seated at table 12, which was the best table in the house, the one by the window with the view of the courtyard garden. They were looking at menus. They were sipping water from crystal glasses identical to the one Diane had thrown. They didn't know. They had no idea that the man on the sidewalk and the owner of the restaurant were the same person. They had walked past a homeless man, humiliated him, demanded his removal, and then sat down at his table in his restaurant and ordered his food. Arthur could have done many things. He could have had them removed. He could have confronted them publicly. He could have called the media, which would have loved the story, the kind of viral narrative that generates millions of views and permanent reputational damage. He did none of these things because Arthur Beaumont was not interested in revenge. He was not interested in humiliation. He had spent 4 years on the streets being humiliated, and he knew what it felt like. And he had no interest in inflicting it on anyone else, even someone who deserved it. What he was interested in was education, the kind that doesn't come from books or lectures, the kind that comes from experience, from being placed in a situation that forces you to confront something you have been avoiding, from having the mirror held up to your face so close that you cannot look away. He picked up the phone and called the kitchen. "Chef, I want you to prepare the full tasting menu for table 12. 7 courses. Use the good stuff, the Wagyu, the truffles, the 96 Burgundy, everything." The chef, a woman named Claudette who had been with Arthur for 15 years and who had heard this tone in his voice before and knew it meant something was happening that she would hear about later, said, "Yes, chef." Arthur hung up. He straightened his sport coat. He walked out of his office, down the hallway, through the private door, and into the dining room. He walked to table 12. Diane was mid-sentence, telling her friends about a charity gala she was chairing next month, when she became aware of a presence beside the table. She looked up. She saw a man in a sport coat and a clean shirt, with a neatly trimmed beard and gray hair pulled back, and she saw the face of the owner of La Maison Dorée, whose photograph hung in the foyer, whose name was on the menu, whose reputation was the reason she had made a reservation 3 weeks in advance. She did not recognize him, that was the thing. She looked directly at the man she had thrown water on 30 minutes ago, and she did not recognize him because she had not seen him. Not on the sidewalk, not when she threw the water, not when she called him a vagrant. She had seen a category, not a person. She had seen homeless the way you see fire hydrant or parking meter, an object, an obstacle, something to be avoided or removed, not something to be looked at closely enough to remember. "Good evening," Arthur said. "I'm Arthur Beaumont. I'm the owner of La Maison Dorée. I wanted to welcome you personally and let you know that your dinner tonight is on the house." Diane's face lit up. The full, delighted, I knew I was important smile of a woman who believes that complimentary meals are a natural consequence of her status. "How generous. Thank you so much. We've heard wonderful things about your restaurant." "That's very kind. I do have one request though, if you don't mind." "Of course. I'd like to join you for a moment. Between courses, there's something I'd like to share with you." Diane glanced at her friends. They shrugged. Why not? The owner of the best restaurant in Philadelphia wanted to sit with them. This was the kind of thing that happened to people like them. This was the reward for being important. "We'd love that," Diane said. Arthur smiled. It was a particular kind of smile. Not warm, not cold. Patient. The smile of a man who has set something in motion and is prepared to wait for it to arrive. The dinner was extraordinary. 7 courses, each one more precise and more beautiful than the last. An amuse-bouche of foie gras with fig compote, a soup of roasted butternut squash with truffle cream, a salad of winter greens with shaved parmesan, and a vinaigrette made from aged sherry. A fish course of pan-seared halibut with beurre blanc, the wagyu, seared to perfection, served with roasted root vegetables, and a red wine reduction that had been simmering since noon. A cheese course. And dessert, a dark chocolate soufflé with crème anglaise that Claudette had been perfecting for a decade. And that was, in the opinion of every food critic who had reviewed La Maison Dorée, the best dessert in Philadelphia. Each course was accompanied by a different wine. The 96 Burgundy, a Sancerre, a Barolo, the kind of wines that exist in a category beyond price, where the value is measured not in dollars, but in decades of care and skill and the accumulated knowledge of generations of winemakers. Diane and her friends ate and drank and laughed and performed the ritual of wealthy women at a fine restaurant, the complimenting and the photographing and the performing of pleasure for each other and for the room and for the invisible audience that they imagined was watching and admiring them. Between the cheese course and dessert, Arthur returned to the table. He sat down in the empty chair that Marcus had placed there at Arthur's request. He folded his hands on the table. He looked at Diane. "I promised I'd share something with you," he said, "and I always keep my promises." Diane set down her wine glass. She was flushed from the meal and the alcohol and the pleasure of being treated like royalty. She was in the perfect mood to receive whatever compliment or anecdote the charming restaurant owner was about to deliver. "I want to tell you a story," Arthur said, "about a young man who grew up in Kensington. Do you know Kensington?" Diane shook her head. She did not know Kensington. She had never been to Kensington. Kensington existed on the other side of the city and the other side of the universe from the world she inhabited. It's a neighborhood in North Philadelphia, one of the poorest in the country. This young man grew up there without a father and with a mother who worked herself to death. Literally. She died at 47 because she couldn't afford to see a doctor. The table was quiet. The mood had shifted. Arthur's voice was calm and unhurried, but there was a gravity to it that the wine and the food and the candlelight could not soften. The young man ended up in foster care, then on the streets. He was homeless for 4 years, from 17 to 21. He slept under bridges. He ate from garbage cans. He was invisible. People walked past him every day and never saw him, never spoke to him, never acknowledged that he was alive. Diane's smile was fading. Not because she was upset by the story, because she was confused by the setting. This was not the kind of anecdote that restaurant owners typically share between courses. This was not charming. This was not fun. One day, a man at a soup kitchen taught him to cook, and cooking saved his life. It gave him a purpose, a skill, a reason to get up in the morning. He worked his way up from dishwasher to line cook to sous chef to head chef. He opened a restaurant. This restaurant. Arthur paused. He let the silence do its work. He let the implications settle over the table like a fog, slow and comprehensive, filling every space. "The young man is me," Arthur said. "I was homeless for 4 years. I slept on sidewalks. I sat outside restaurants like this one with a cardboard cup, hoping someone would see me as a person. Most people didn't. Most people looked through me. Some people were cruel." He looked at Diane, directly, steadily, without accusation, without anger, with the unflinching clarity of a man who has spent decades looking at the world from both sides and who understands that the view from the bottom is more honest than the view from the top. "Some people threw water in my face." The table went absolutely still, the kind of stillness that precedes earthquakes and revelations and the collapse of everything you thought you knew about the moment you were in. Diane's face changed. The color drained out of it. The flush from the wine disappeared, as if someone had pulled a plug. Her eyes widened, her mouth opened, and the recognition arrived, not slowly, not gradually, but all at once, like a train hitting a wall. She looked at Arthur's face. She looked past the clean shirt and the sport coat and the trimmed beard. She looked at the bone structure, the eyes, the scar on his left temple that she hadn't noticed on the sidewalk, but that she could see now, up close, in the candlelight. The homeless man, the man she had thrown water on, the man she had called a vagrant, the man she had told to stay away from places like this, the man whose existence she had treated as an offense and whose greeting she had punished with ice water and contempt. He was sitting across from her, in his restaurant, at his table, in his chair, and he had just served her the best meal of her life. "Oh my God," Diane whispered. Her hand went to her mouth. The diamond tennis bracelet caught the candlelight and threw a cascade of tiny rainbows across the tablecloth, the same way it had thrown them across the sidewalk 30 minutes ago when the world had been simpler and cruelty had been costless. Her friends were staring. They had gone through the same recognition process, slower perhaps, but arriving at the same destination. The sidewalk, the water, the man, the owner, the same person. The horrified understanding that they had watched their friend assault the owner of the restaurant they were sitting in and had done nothing. "I'm not telling you this to embarrass you," Arthur said. His voice was the same, soft, unhurried, patient. "I'm telling you because I think you deserve to know who you are, not who you think you are, not who your clothes say you are, not who your credit card says you are, who you actually are in the moment when you think no one important is watching." He leaned forward slightly. "You threw water in the face of a man who said good evening to you. You did it because he was sitting on a sidewalk and wearing old clothes, and you decided, in that fraction of a second, that he was less than human, that he didn't deserve a greeting, that he didn't deserve to occupy the same space as you." He paused. "You were wrong. Not about me. About the principle. Every person on that sidewalk, every person sleeping under every bridge in this city, every person you have ever stepped over or looked through or pretended not to see is a person, a full, complete, complicated human being with a history and a heart and a story you know nothing about." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a card. He placed it on the table in front of Diane. "This is the card for a nonprofit I founded called Second Table. We provide meals, job training, and transitional housing for homeless individuals in Philadelphia. We serve 400 people a week. We have placed over 200 people in permanent employment in the last 3 years. We operate out of a kitchen 2 blocks from here." He looked at her. "Your dinner tonight was $743. That's what the tasting menu cost for 4 people with the wine pairings. I'm not going to charge you. Not because you're important, because I want you to take that $743 and donate it to Second Table. And I want you to volunteer there. One Saturday, one morning, 3 hours. Come and serve food to the people you don't want to see. Look them in the eye, say good evening, and see what happens." He stood up. He buttoned his sport coat. "Your soufflé will be out in 3 minutes. Claudette's soufflés don't. Wait. Neither Mrs. Ashbury does grace." He walked away from the table, through the dining room, past the photographs on the wall, into his office. He closed the door. He sat down at his desk, and he looked at the security camera feed and watched Diane Ashbury sit at table 12 with her hands in her lap and her face crumbling, and her friends sitting in the particular excruciating silence of people who have just witnessed someone being shown who they really are. The soufflé arrived. Nobody ate it. Marcus, standing at the front door, watched them leave 20 minutes later. Diane walked out without speaking. Her friends followed. They passed through the foyer and the brass-framed doors and down the polished granite steps, past the spot on the sidewalk where Arthur had been sitting. where a small puddle of ice water was still evaporating in the evening air. Diane stopped at the spot. She looked at the wet concrete. She looked at the empty space where a man had been sitting and where she had decided in the span of a heartbeat that he was nothing. She stood there for a long time, long enough for her friends to get into their cars and drive away, long enough for the doorman to go back inside, long enough for the streetlights to come on and the evening traffic to thin and the city to settle into the particular quiet of a weekday night when the restaurants are closing and the sidewalks are emptying and the only people left are the ones who have nowhere else to go. Then she took out her phone. She looked at the card Arthur had given her. She opened her browser. She typed in the web address for Second Table, and she made a donation, $743. She didn't go home right away. She sat in her car in the parking garage across from the restaurant, and she stared at her hands on the steering wheel. The same hands that had held the crystal glass, the same hands that had thrown the water, the same hands that were now trembling, not from cold, but from the aftershock of being confronted with a version of herself that she hadn't known existed. She thought about what Arthur had said, not the speech, not the facts. The question underneath all of it, the question that he had never asked directly, but that was implicit in everything he said and everything he was. How did you become this person? It wasn't a question about the water. The water was a symptom. The question was about the disease. The slow, incremental, invisible process by which a human being who was presumably born with the same capacity for empathy as anyone else had arrived at a place where she could throw ice water in the face of a stranger for the crime of saying good evening. How does that happen? How do you get there? What combination of privilege and insulation and the constant reinforcement of a social hierarchy that places you at the top and everyone else at varying distances below you produces a person who can look at another human being and see nothing? Diane didn't have the answer. She was 44 years old, and for the first time in her life, she was asking a question that she didn't already know the answer to. She drove home. She sat in her living room. She looked at the crystal glasses in the cabinet. 14 of them, $600 for the set, and she thought about the one she had thrown. She thought about the weight of it in her hand, the satisfying, decisive feeling of throwing it, the absolute certainty in the moment that she was right and he was wrong and that people like him had no place in her world. She had been so sure. She went to Second Table on Saturday. She almost didn't. She woke up at 6 in the morning and lay in bed for an hour constructing reasons not to go. She had a headache. She had a tennis match. She had a lunch reservation. She had a life that was full and busy and did not include serving meals to homeless people in a kitchen 2 blocks from a French restaurant. But the face, Arthur's face, the water running down his beard, the stillness, the patience, the absolute absence of flinch. It wouldn't leave her alone. It lived behind her eyes like an afterimage, like the spot you see when you look at a bright light and then look away. It was burned into her retina. She couldn't not see it. She went. Second Table operated out of a converted warehouse on a side street behind La Maison Dorée. The space was industrial, concrete floors and exposed beams and fluorescent lights, but it was clean and warm and smelled like cooking food, which is the most welcoming smell in the world regardless of the setting. A woman named Claudette met her at the door, the same Claudette who made the soufflés, because Claudette, like every employee at La Maison Dorée, worked shifts at Second Table. It was part of the job, part of the culture, part of the deal that Arthur had struck with his staff when he opened the non-profit. You cook for the rich 6 nights a week, and on the 7th, you cook for the poor, and you treat both with exactly the same respect. You must be Mrs. Ashbury, Claudette said, not with warmth, not with judgment, with the professional neutrality of a woman who has been told to expect a guest and who has opinions about the guest but is keeping them to herself. Arthur told me you might come. He knew I would come. Claudette looked at her. Arthur always knows. Diane was given an apron, a hairnet, a ladle. She was assigned to the soup station, which was not the hardest job, but which was the most visible, because the soup station was the first thing people saw when they came through the line, and the person behind the soup station was the first face they encountered, and Arthur believed that first faces mattered more than any course on any menu. The line opened at 8. The people came in a steady stream that didn't stop for 3 hours. Men, women, families, children, old people with walkers, young people with backpacks, people who looked like they had been sleeping rough for years, and people who looked like they had been sleeping rough for a week, and people who looked, if you didn't look too closely, like they might have a home to go to, but who were here because the home they had was empty of food, and empty of warmth, and empty of the feeling that someone cared whether they ate today. Diane ladled soup. She ladled it for 3 hours without a break, bowl after bowl after bowl, and each person who came through the line looked at her and said, "Thank you." Not all of them. Some of them didn't speak. Some of them kept their eyes down. Some of them were so deep in their own suffering that a smile from a stranger was not enough to reach them. But most of them said thank you, and some of them said good morning. And one man, an elderly man with a white beard and a military cap and eyes that had seen things that Diane could not imagine, looked at her and said, "God bless you, ma'am. God bless you, ma'am." The words hit her like the water she had thrown, not because they hurt, because they were kind, because they came from a man who had nothing and who was giving her, freely and without expectation, the only thing he had to give, a blessing, a wish for her well-being, from a person she would have crossed the street to avoid 2 weeks ago. Diane put down the ladle. She walked to the bathroom. She locked the door. And she cried. She cried the way she hadn't cried since her father died. Full body, ugly, unglamorous tears that had nothing to do with mascara and everything to do with the sudden, violent, irreversible understanding that she had been wrong. Not mistaken, not misguided, wrong. In the deepest, most fundamental way that a person can be wrong. She had been wrong about people. She had divided the world into categories, important and unimportant, visible and invisible, worthy and worthless. And she had spent 44 years living in the first category and ignoring the second. And she had never, not once, questioned the division. Until a man she threw water on served her a 7-course meal and asked her to come see the other side. She dried her eyes. She went back to the soup station. She picked up the ladle. She served soup for another hour. When the line closed, she took off her apron and her hairnet, and she stood in the kitchen and looked at the empty pots and the stacked bowls and the clean counters and the crew of volunteers who were already mopping the floor and organizing the supplies for tomorrow. She found Claudette. "I'd like to come back next Saturday," she said. Claudette looked at her. Something shifted in her expression. Not warmth exactly. Respect. The specific, hard-earned respect that comes from watching someone do something they didn't want to do and doing it anyway. "We open at 7. The soup doesn't make itself." Diane came back. The next Saturday, and the Saturday after that, and the Saturday after that. She came every Saturday for a year. She ladled soup. She wiped tables. She washed dishes. She learned the names of the regulars. She learned their stories. She learned that the man with the military cap was a Vietnam veteran named Leonard, who had served 2 tours and who had been sleeping in a shelter for 6 years because the VA had lost his paperwork. She learned that the woman with the 3 children was a single mother named Patricia, who worked 2 jobs and still couldn't afford childcare and groceries in the same month. She learned that the teenager with the headphones was a kid named Deshaun, who had been kicked out of his house for being gay, and who was sleeping on friends' couches and trying to finish high school because his guidance counselor had told him a diploma was his ticket out, and he believed her. She learned these things because she asked, because she sat down across from people at the communal tables after her shift and said the words that Arthur had taught her, not through instruction, but through example. "Good evening. How are you? Tell me about yourself." 7 words, 12 words, 16 words. The vocabulary of seeing another person. The language of dignity. Diane Ashbury became Second Table's largest private donor. She gave $50,000 in the first year, $100,000 in the second. She organized fundraisers among her mainline friends, women who had never been to North Philadelphia and who came to Second Table on a Saturday morning in their tennis clothes and left 5 hours later with dishwater on their Lululemon and something in their eyes that hadn't been there when they arrived. She never told anyone about the water. She never told anyone about the sidewalk. She never explained why she had started volunteering. When people asked, she said simply, "Someone showed me something I needed to see." Arthur knew. Of course Arthur knew. He knew because Marcus told him, and because Claudette told him, and because the donation came in the day after the dinner, and because he had spent his entire life reading people the way he read ingredients, looking for what was underneath the surface. And he had seen, in the 3 seconds when Diane looked at the wet concrete on the sidewalk, the first crack in the wall. He never mentioned it. He never confronted her again. He never brought up the water or the sidewalk or the evening when everything changed. He just watched from his office, from the kitchen, from the Tuesday sidewalks where he sat in his old clothes, and he watched a woman who had thrown water transform into a woman who ladled soup. And he felt each time he saw her the same thing he felt when a dish came out perfectly. Satisfaction, not pride. Satisfaction, the quiet, steady satisfaction of a man who believes in people and who is occasionally proven right. Nobody knows what happened after that. Actually, that's not true anymore. Everybody knows, because the story got out the way stories always get out, through whispers and social media, and a local reporter who heard about the homeless restaurant owner from a volunteer at Second Table, and who wrote an article that went viral in the way that stories of unexpected grace sometimes do, cutting through the noise and the cynicism and the endless scroll of bad news like a beam of light through a dirty window. Arthur didn't participate in the coverage. He didn't give interviews. He didn't confirm or deny the details. He let the story speak for itself, because he had learned from a lifetime of cooking that the best dishes are the ones that don't need explanation. You put them on the table and they speak for themselves. But Arthur Beaumont believes she showed up. He believes it because he has spent his entire life betting on people, on their capacity to surprise themselves, on the stubborn, buried, often invisible seed of decency that exists in everyone, even in people who throw water. He believes it because he has to, because if he didn't believe it, the restaurant and the nonprofit and the Tuesday, walks in old clothes, and the patience and the grace and the 7-course meal served to a woman who didn't deserve it would all be meaningless. And they're not meaningless. They're the point. They're the whole point. The point is not revenge. The point is not humiliation. The point is the moment when someone sees themselves clearly, perhaps for the first time, and decides whether to look away or to look closer. Arthur still goes out every Tuesday. Flannel shirt, work boots, untrimmed beard. He sits on sidewalks and watches the world and measures the distance between who people are and who they think they are. He does it because the distance matters, because in that distance lives the possibility of change. The possibility that someone will look down and see a person instead of a problem. That someone will say good evening instead of reaching for a glass of water. That someone will pause for just a moment in the rush of their expensive, curated, insulated life and wonder what it's like on the other side of the glass. La Maison Dorée is still the best restaurant in Philadelphia. The food is still extraordinary. The wine list is still legendary. The soufflé is still, in the opinion of every critic who has tried it, the best dessert in the city. The wait for a reservation is still 3 weeks. The dining room still glows with candlelight and conversation and the ambient jazz that plays softly from speakers hidden in the ceiling. But the best thing about La Maison Dorée has nothing to do with food. It's the door. The brass-framed front door where Marcus stands every evening, 6 nights a week, in his uniform, greeting every guest with the same words, the same warmth, the same unconditional welcome that Arthur taught him on his first day, and that Marcus has carried with him through 4 years of college and into a career in hospitality that he now realizes is not a stepping stone to something better, but the thing itself. Good evening. Welcome to La Maison Dorée. Every guest, every time. The woman in Chanel and the man in jeans, the hedge fund manager and the bus driver, the first-time visitor and the regular who comes every Friday, the person who can afford the tasting menu and the person who saved for 3 months to be here, every single one, because that's the culture, that's the house that Arthur built, a house where the door is open and the greeting is universal and the respect is non-negotiable. 2 blocks away, at Second Table, another door opens every morning at 7. A different kind of door, no brass frame, no granite steps, just a metal door with a sign that says, "Everyone welcome," and a smell of cooking soup and a warmth that has nothing to do with temperature. Both doors were opened by the same man, a man who was homeless, a man who was invisible, a man who was told 1,000 times in 1,000 ways by 1,000 people that he was nothing, and who built something anyway, something beautiful. Something excellent, something that serves 7-course meals to people in Chanel and hot soup to people in cardboard boxes, and treats them both with exactly the same respect, because cooking is not about the ingredients, It's about respect. Chef Reginald taught him that on a Tuesday in a soup kitchen a lifetime ago, and Arthur has never forgotten. Not the lesson, not the soup kitchen, not the sidewalk, not the rain, not the cold, not a single moment of the life that made him who he is. He remembers all of it. Every night before he locks the door of La Maison Dorée and walks to his car, he passes the spot on the sidewalk where he sits on Tuesdays. He looks at the concrete. He feels the ghost of the cold seeping through his jeans. He remembers what it was like to be invisible, and he says quietly, to no one, the same 2 words he said to Diane Ashbury on the evening she threw water in his face. Good evening, because everyone deserves a greeting. Everyone deserves to be seen. Everyone, without exception, deserves to be treated as if they matter, even the ones who haven't learned to do the same, especially them.